Iron Within and Iron Without. Let's talk about the power of the Fellhammer Siege Host and the Iron Warriors in 10th edition Warhammer 40k. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Iron Warriors, and in this video I thought we'd do an overview of how their themed detachments rules are shaping up in the 10th edition of the game, and some of their strengths and weaknesses on the table. In the lore, the Iron Warriors are the bitter legion of Perturabo, the 4th legion of Space Marines, and dour and pragmatic, efficient experts of battle, excelling in siege warfare when they brought countless tough worlds to crack into the Imperial fold as the Great Crusade expanded amongst the stars, growing ever more resentful of the great burdens and victories won by his legion. Perturabo ultimately joined Horus, this resentment eventually spilling into open warfare against their great rivals, the Imperial Fists. In battle they have an affinity for firepower and high technology more so than others of the Chaos Legions, maybe tending to fight a bit more at range than at melee compared with some, and often in the past they've perhaps been a little bit on the underpowered side in rules previously, getting some nice shooting rules, but maybe the Chaos overall faction tending to reward close combat troops a bit more than ranged firepower, though I would say that that's far less the case in 10th edition, with lots of their firepower units getting pretty good. It's quite nice they've actually got a detachment that tries to realise their bitter siegecraft in the 10th edition codex. Seems to be a detachment that really focuses on their watchwords Iron Within, Iron Without in the Fellhammer Siege Host, adding some enormous durability to their legion. In the codex, the Fellhammer Siege Host can be used by all the Chaos Legions, though as mentioned it does seem to be particularly suited to the Gene Sons of Perturabo, and its core rule is rather appropriately Iron Fortitude. Basically any non-damned units within the army get a very nice -1 to wound debuff against any enemy attacks that have greater strength than their toughness, and just in general makes the army extra durable against the most efficient sorts of enemy firepower for killing any individual foe. Most of the time the best weapons to take down a given target in Warhammer 40k often tend to be wounding on a sweet spot of 3+. Weapons do pay more for higher strength, so usually their optimal chosen targets will be things where they get maximal benefit out of the wound chart for minimal investment, so 3+ generally tends to be a good place to try and wound things on. And then this Iron Warriors themed detachment just completely flips that on its head. If you're wounding an enemy on a 3+, then it's essentially a 33% boost to durability, taking it down to a 4+ to wound. It's really nice to have army-wide, and basically is useful for just about every unit in the Chaos Codex really. It's maybe only the really tough things that are like toughness 12 or above that won't regularly get good value out of that, but even things like battle tanks can be fairly good for it. If you say a toughness 10 vehicle being wounded on a 3+ by las cannons, then that's a very nice defensive boost there. Overall I'd say it's a high value core rule, something that will just add extra weight to your army without you really having to change plans at all. Moving on to stratagems, first up we've got Persistent Assailants, a battle tactic for one of your units attacked in the fight phase. They get to re-roll hit rolls when they swing back, and also get the benefit of re-rolling wound rolls if your unit's been taken down to below half strength. This one I wouldn't say is that great, it's a bit situational with the setup, but definitely seems like it's one to look out for, as it could be big for the exact right unit in the right time and place. Maybe a bit in the opponent's hands as to how useful they make that for you though. For 1 CP, there's Brutal Attrition. This one happens when one non-damned unit is selected as a target of attacks in the fight phase. Each time an attack is allocated to your unit, you get to roll 1d6 to a maximum of 6. For each 4+ that you roll, you deal 1 mortal wound back at the enemy. A pretty reasonable chance to bounce back 3 mortal wounds if you're attacked by something big and nasty that's stacking a whole ton of saves on you. This one seems alright if you're about to get wiped out by a big scary unit of elites where 3 mortal wounds might well get you some value. I feel like perhaps the timing of this one isn't super helpful though, as it's usually going to happen before your turn, and you only take the damage off the enemy after they've just got to attack, as those sort of things like maybe with the grenade stratagem tend to be a bit more helpful if you can do the damage to the enemy so they don't get to hit back, even though I guess it might make the enemy units easier for you to bring down overall next turn. For 1 CP, there's Pitiless Cannonade. This one's a battle tactic stratagem, and you trigger it when you shoot an enemy unit below half strength, and you get critical hits on a 5+, which would often be relevant for your Dark Pacts. I'm not really the biggest fan of this one, though I guess you could get it free with a Chaos Lord if it made sense to. The below half strength thing is just an annoying thing to set up, and it's usually not going to be relevant. Often you really want your biggest damage boost against the toughest things in your opponent's army, not things you already managed to destroy the majority of. It might just not even be needed. Next up, for 1 command point, there's Point Blank Destruction. This one's an interesting one where you get the pistol keyword on all ranged weapons for 1 unit in engagement range. The only exception is that you don't get it on blast weapons. This could be potentially nice to light up the enemy with, say, Obliterators, Havocs, or maybe even a whole bunch of Terminator combi bolters in the shooting phase, or maybe ignore the big guns never tire penalty with vehicles and still get them to hit on full ballistic skill if that makes sense. I feel like this could be nice enough if your opponent locks up a shooting unit and think that that's going to save them from the firepower for it. Though in reality, I feel like in a lot of situations it's still going to make more sense to fall back and save yourself a command point though. Say if you had some Havocs in close combat, but their guns wouldn't be quite powerful enough to actually wipe out the enemy unit that's just charged them, it might make sense just to fall back anyway and light up that unit that charged them with the rest of your army. You don't really want the Havocs to shoot the enemy, maybe kill one or two of them, and then just get wiped out in your own fight phase. That just doesn't seem like it's worth it to use this stratagem. Overall, I really think it's not bad. Will come up from time to time and maybe incentivizes having a few more ranged units in the army. Though I probably wouldn't get carried away with this. Sometimes it could be really big and allow one of your shooting units just to demolish an enemy unit that thought they could safely lock it up. Sometimes it just might not make sense to do that and allow the rest of your gun line to take them out. Next up, for one command point, we've got the really good stratagem. 1 CP for Steadfast Determination, which I think is one of the best reasons to play this detachment in the first place. It basically means that you get a 5+ Feel No Pain for any non-damned unit against enemy shooting. A really nice reactive defensive boost, particularly for big vehicles or certain multi-wound units getting hit by a whole load of firepower. A 5+ Feel No Pain usually means that you gain basically plus 50% durability for that turn, and when you could put that on certain things like Terminators or even things all the way up to like a Khorne Lord of Skulls, that's going to make a seriously tanky unit to try and take out. I think it is a shame that you can only use this against ranged attacks and not against melee. Would have been a bit more helpful, I think, if you could use it both in the shooting phase and the fight phase, but certainly an enormously powerful one to have if you're fighting against a more ranged gunline type enemy. I could see most armies basically wanting to use this just about every turn, if they were doing so. Finally, for one command point, they've got Siegecraft, which I think low-key is one of the other better stratagems as well. You select one nominated unit in your army declared at the start of the charge phase, and that unit is now -2 to charge for the rest of this phase, not cumulative with any other negative modifiers. I guess this is as good as they get as defense against being charged. Shame they can't use the Feel No Pain there, but every time this one does swing a successful charge into a failed one, it's got a good chance of being absolutely massive. It's likely to be best used if your opponent maybe was trying to make a 6 or 7-inch charge. Suddenly turning that into an 8 or 9-inch charge is a whole world of difference. And in particular, it could be very painful if the enemy is trying to charge you out of reserve. You could change a 9-inch charge into an 11-1 here, which goes from, in the first place, unlikely to very, very unlikely indeed. Otherwise, beyond that, we've got the enhancements. Iron Artifice is an infantry-only one for 10 points to give all their attacks anti-vehicle and anti-fortification 4+, probably most useful for a Chaos Lord's Demon Hammer to get some devastating wounds on the go there. I'd say for 10 points it's usable. It would genuinely make their squad a lot more threatening against vehicles, though it is a shame that it excludes monsters. The fortification rule is rarely going to come up in most games though. I'd say by far the best enhancement out of them is the Bastion Plate. 10 points for this one for a non-jump lord, and this is the one that basically changes one failed save to damage 0 for their unit each battle round. At 10 points, presuming you are taking a Chaos Lord, this one is absolutely auto-include, basically guaranteed extra defense, as you could just save it for something that's say going to one-shot a Terminator, and then your 10 points have just meant that one Terminator that was kind of hard to remove in the first place gets to remain on the board instead. That could be around about 35 points worth of models saved then and there. I think if you're using this detachment, it is worth having a Chaos Lord on hand just to use that alone. Could be pretty solid for Chosen or even just a Lord in standard Legionaries too. Otherwise, for 20 points, there's Warp Tracer. One unit shot by the bearer can't gain the benefit of cover this phase. I think it's generally alright for the cost, given that you could use that to affect quite a lot of firepower, and if you can put that on one of the biggest and scariest units in the enemy army, the results could be big. Very nice for things like Space Marine Land Raiders and cover perhaps. I think the main issue though is that you need a somewhat pricey character in the right position to coordinate it, and 20 points on top of what the character already costs is probably going to be quite a lot. They would still need to be absolutely doing their own thing in a powerful way as well. Finally, for 15 points, there's Ironbound Enmity. This one gives the bearer a +1 to wound while they're on an objective. Could maybe be okay for a Demon Prince, and it doesn't seem awful for other character units. It is a good damage buff, though will be a bit situational. It's no good if you happen to need to fight something that's not on an objective. I suppose probably most useful overall for things like Demon Princes or maybe a Lord Discordant, where I guess you could get +1 to wound with the Fellhammer if they suddenly got good. The requirement to be on an objective really does limit this one though. Out of these enhancements, I'd rate the Bastion Plate as the best, and maybe the Warp Tracer as my next most favourite one. The other two maybe being a little bit lower yield, though usable enough if you wanted to put them on. They are both fairly cheap. Overall, between the core rule and the stratagems and support, it does seem to encourage a few things in the army more so than others. I'd say that perhaps one of the most obvious data sheets in the army that seems really quite nice here would be the Chaos Terminator squad. Terminators are already fairly tanky in their own right, with toughness 5, plenty of wounds, and good saves, and having relatively low toughness for being a tanky unit I think does them favours in this detachment, as a lot of things that could be wounding them really quite efficiently could have that reduced onto a 4+, or maybe down from a 2 to a 3. They are also a unit that you can have the Bastion Plate in to cancel some failed saves, which is all very nice. Plus they seem like a pretty excellent focal choice for the Feel No Pain stratagem against some shooting. You can have a massive great big 370 point unit plus attached character. That seems like the exact sort of thing that you'd want to use the Feel No Pain on. I could even disrupt enemy charges with that -2 to charge stratagem if they are going up against an enemy Death Star and they're being charged from a sort of awkward middle distance. I feel like a Terminator Lord might be the first choice for them, given that that can bear the Bastion Plate. The Terminator Sorcerer maybe feels like it could be an interesting option elsewhere in the army though. Feels like this guy could perhaps be an interesting 1-2 punch with the Warp Tracer that could reliably get a few hits on something. Between that and Death Hex, you could potentially have a unit in cover essentially being -2 to the saves that they would have otherwise been. Seems pretty excellent for deleting things with very high armor saves with a whole bunch of firepower. Overall, though, for the detachment, I feel like a fair few of the enhancements and stratagems maybe feel a bit peripheral. I'd say the biggest sources of strength come from the detachment rule for just generally helpfully tougher chaos, the 5+ Feel No Pain stratagem to make some things incredibly tough against shooting. The Bastion Plate cancelling saves does just seem like a source of strength, as it seems auto-include to me at 10 points, and that -2 to charge stratagem I think is actually really quite a powerful one. It won't be worth using literally every time the opponent charges you, but if they're trying to do a sort of middle distance one around about 7 inches or so, I think it easily could be high yield enough to have a go with if you were being charged by something that's going to have a very meaningful close combat. I would say that overall for the detachment, it basically adds you a fair bit of raw durability, but not really a lot of clever tricks beyond that -2 to charging thing. I'd say most of the more peripheral stratagems could be handy situationally, but never seem like they're going to be ridiculously high value. And most of them just don't really change the sort of way that you might play normally, just having Space Marines going about doing their thing as per normal, but a little bit tankier and a bit more support for ranged units being a bit more flexible. General discussion about this one seems to have been that it just feels a bit reactive and doesn't really have many ways for you to be strategically clever beyond normal datasheet things for Chaos Marines. I suspect that with that in mind, it's probably going to be a detachment that maybe does a little bit better in casual games versus competitive. Nice, easy and predictable raw strength to use, which I'm sure against some opponents will feel kind of oppressive in a more casual meta, though I feel like you might have a lot of people getting tempted by the other goodies from different detachments in a more competitive one. Massive durability, and particularly at range, is all well and good, though they'll definitely have stiff competition from all the other cool detachments out there. For those rules, I feel like it makes sense to have at least 1 or 2 huge units that will really like the Feel No Pain, things like a big Terminator block, maybe even a Lord of Skulls potentially, maybe a Chaos Land Raider, and as mentioned I feel like Terminators both do that well and also will make very good use of the wound roll debuff, so seem like they're particularly standout. Otherwise though, most things will generally like the -1 to wound thing, maybe even toughness 10 to 11 tanks versus las cannons, or even things like mass legionaries could be unusually hard to take down in this detachment. Could be interesting if this one could actually be good for Chaos Battle Line things, maybe a bunch of las cannons and heavy melee weapons and good objective control, and being tougher than you might expect for toughness for 2 wound Astartes. Otherwise though, with just a lot of peripheral supporting rules for firepower, it does seem kind of likely that a lot of people might build this one a bit more gunline than some, being able to strip cover easily, get pistol and melee, and decrease the likelihood of enemies charging all seem good things for slightly gunline chaos. I feel like in general Chaos Space Marines do tend to hit fairly hard in the damage output kind of front with their Dark Pacts anyway, so maybe having some unusually durable gun turrets doesn't hurt with that. Putting that together, here's just one idea for an Iron Warriors Fellhammer Siege host army list. I believe the points should be roughly 2,000 points at time of recording, though obviously with Games Workshop points updates things might change around a bit, I'd take this more as just a general rough idea with a little bit of nod to theming, as opposed to anything being too ferociously optimised. I thought given that Terminators seem pretty strong in this, would go for 2 detachments with fairly maximal power fists and a Reaper autocannon in each, one big unit of 10 and one unit of 5, the big squad led by Chaos Lord in Terminator armour with the Bastion plate, that one being an aim for the 5+ feel no pain stratagem as needed, and the other one with that Sorcerer and Terminator armour with Warp Tracer, potentially deep striking or rapid ingressing, and hopefully throwing down the combination of Death Hex and Ignores cover for all the firepower units. To back them up with some serious big guns, we've got 3 Chaos Predator Destructors, all with the good AP on the autocannons against infantry, plus las cannon sponsons to chip in against tanks, 2 Mighty Chaos Vindicators that are going to be pretty intimidating to anything they can focus fire on, and a couple of deep striking obliterators, potentially having a little bit of Ignores line of sight shooting if you need it. Beyond that, for objective support, there's 3 units of 10 cultists. Iron Warriors do like their cannon fodder after all, and they can do a bit of sticky objectives and screening and dying on the front line. Maybe one squad going in strategic reserve to threaten to do secondaries and things. And then for a little bit more weight on objectives, there's 2 units of 5 legionaries, getting heavy melee weapons and las cannons, likely aiming to footslog towards the central objectives and skirmish with enemy objective grabbers that can hit fairly hard and should at least be a bit tougher in this detachment. I certainly wouldn't have been against giving them some rhinos to get them there, or maybe a Chaos Lord to lead one or more of them. Could certainly drop some Terminators or firepower if you wanted for that sort of thing. In any case, just a rough list idea. I'll be interested to hear what you guys are planning to run with this formation if you're planning to give it a go in 10th edition 40k. In any case, look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas. My first impressions are that it's probably not going to be one of the single strongest Chaos Space Marine detachments out of the book, but definitely does have its own fairly scary strength and some easy to use detachment rules. I'm sure some people will enjoy getting some good value out of this. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and I do tend to post new ones just about every day. There'll certainly be a bit more chaos flavoured content from the recent codex. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and keep these videos coming, I just thought I'd mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to check it out. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.